I would start just with the broad question because I think a lot of different people or organizations have slightly different definitions. How do you define hazing?
Hazing is the assertion of power on people it's essentially it's people's, you know, coerced response to power, right? And the ways in which it's used as a lever to control and compete for people's behavior and conformity.
Can you elaborate more on that coerced response, what that means?
Yeah, so basically it's, forcing people into situations that make them uncomfortable, which force them to get to a means that you want them to, right? So it's forcing them to conform to expectations to fit into an organization, right? Or to fit a certain perception and brand.
And so the different hazing research that you've done, what I guess factors or specific things have you been looking at in the realm of hazing in your research?
Yeah, a lot of my research looks at hazing within student organizations. So, like for fraternities, sororities, athletics, um, intramural sports, like your rugby team, your men's choir groups, ROTC. And so I'm kind of looking at how hazing happens across the campus, right? Not just in fraternity and sorority life, and just seeing what some of the nuances are between them. Hazing is not the same as it is for like a sorority or like a women's athletic team as it would be for a fraternity or like a men's rugby team or like the men's basketball team, men's football team, even versus like a co-educational group, right? Like your co-ed choir group or something like that. Yeah. And so
Yeah,
it is just not the same. So
yeah. Can you give, I guess, some examples or talk about
oh,
that like more concretely of like the
absolutely.
different kinds of things we
Oh,
see?
absolutely. Yeah, this is kind of like a high level summary, but basically because higher education tends to be segregated by gender a lot, right? You have these single gendered institutions like fraternities and sororities or athletics or whatever. Um, Men's spaces, men's organizations tend to be more physical and tend to involve more alcohol, right? And so hazing is it's to compete more, right? And it's to essentially get men to compete to prove their worthiness or their fit into the organization, right? So trying to force them to actually demonstrate how masculine they are so that they can fit into this sort of hyper masculine norm that like a lot of these organizations have, right? So it's to prove how manly you are. Um, and then if you're a good fit, and so it's a test of fitness and it's a way to filter you. Um, and so it's to force you to compete with other men. Um, so think like Lord of the Flies, right? If you've ever read that novel, it's very similar. That's like the best example that I can give. Um, and then the other example with fraternities and other men's groups is they use it specifically with hazing. There's like a competition piece of like I'm gonna haze you more than someone else, right? So there's the masculinity piece, there's a competition piece. um and specifically with hazing in men's spaces, hazing also has a party factor, right? Like hazing involves a lot of partying too, and forced partying. So there's a lot of alcohol use and a lot of like socialization, right? So it's like, can you fit into the party spaces too, right? Can you fit in and socialize and hang with us? So there's like the socialization piece. Do you fit in a social way and you fit in like a physical way through all of these tests of masculinity? So it tends to be like calisthenics, um, alcohol use, right? Test of how durable you are, things like that. Stamina. Versus sororities tend to have more acts of servitude. So um, typically hazing is used as a filtration process, right? They want you in the organizations and they're trying to find reasons for you not to be there, right? And so it's the opposite of men, right? It's to prove you have to be there, Women, it's to prove why you shouldn't be there, right? And so it's more cognitive, it's more emotional, um, and tends to be more individualized, right? And so men's hazing tends to be a lot more chaotic, right? Like you broke these rules, I'm going to come after you, right? And it tends to be more, women's hazing tends to be more spiteful, right? And more intentional and targeted. And it tends to be smaller groups of women, specifically singling out one or two other women. And it tends to be planned and targeted, right? And so it's really hard to pin down. It's ominous, it's nebulous, it's kind of like, slight comments, but persistent patterns of it. Um, rare if there is, physical women's hazing, it tends to be in small groups of like two or three women that get cornered and have to do favors, scavenger hunts, a lot of force bonding, right? That's what's unique about women's hazing. Like, I'm going to take five of you, throw you in my back seat, and we're going to go on this retreat for 5 days, but we're not going to tell you where we are going. Um, Not as much drinking, not much calisthenics, like so. It tends to be servitude and acts of service, force bonding, and a lot of singling out through humiliation and shame. And so it's more trying to find reasons why you should not be there, right? Rather than trying to prove. If you've already been, and so all of the women's organizations, sorority or basketball or whatever the women's institution is, usually has this extended period where they're already feeling you out, right? If it's, Bama Rush Talk is a great example, but that mirrors other women's spaces. And so there's this really formalized pattern of like, you've already proven you can be there. Now you have to prove, now we have to find reasons why you shouldn't be here. So hazing is more of a filtration process. And so hazing is extremely gendered, and it's just complicated. So
Definitely. Complicated is definitely a good word for it. Is there, have you observed differences too, not just between genders, but between types of groups as to the hazing that
yeah.
is preferred?
Oh yeah. So like men's group fraternities and athletics are going to like drink more, right? And it may even involve illegal drugs of some kind. That's also not uncommon. Involve more partying, right? That sort of, so the hazing through socialization. Oh, you got to hang, hang out with us and drink, and you don't want to. Here, chug this bottle of vodka, right? Um, drink, chug this beer. We're gonna do a case race. All these kind of like, you know, and just a lot of pranks, and your physical test of servitude. Like you have to clean this person's room. Um, Sometimes calisthenics, but not as much, right? Whereas men's athletics is going to have a lot of competition and a lot of not just servitude, but like specifically hazing to be on the team, and there's like, and with men with athletics, there's more phases of hazing, right? They're like shorter, but like varying phases. And so like you'll get hazed when you join the team, and then you'll get hazed to be a starter, right? So there's like these phases of it where it's with fraternities, you're only hazed when you're a new member typically, right? And so it tends to be a one time, but like a longer term thing, whereas like there are these phases with athletics because your status expands over time. Um, with, with women's groups, if it's like a sorority or women's choir group or something like that, it tends to be again more servitude and more targeted, but sororities do involve drinking, right? But usually do not involve drugs. Um, and coeducational groups are sort of a combination of all of those things, right? They're like a hybrid. So you're going to have the drinking, you're going to have the competition, you're not going to have physical tests. Like no one's going to make you do calisthenics like you would on a sports team, right? Women's sports teams tend to involve a lot of physical tests of hazing, right? With like the cognitive and emotional pieces, but without the drinking. And so to me, the men's athletics teams don't have a lot of mental tests or emotional forms of hazing, right? And so the women on sports teams tend to get the the hit from both sides, right? It's like emotional, it's cognitive, and it's physical, right? And so that can really mess with you, you know. And I think the other thing that's happening with hazing is it happens on social media, right? It's not just in person, it's like omnipotent all of the time. And so hazing, that's where it gets complicated and messy, right? It's people filming you being shamed, right? And then it's on some site that they think is password protected, but it's probably not. And that goes viral, right? Um, or it's, you being filmed having to chug vodka, or you being shamed wearing outfits or doing a TikTok dance or something. So hazing looks, and it's someone making a fake burner account and like, harassing you, sending you racial epithets and a lot of foul language. Like these are common things in hazing.
Yeah, I didn't know that specifically. I know earlier we had mentioned like social media and like burner
Mhm.
accounts and harassment, but that takes on a racial tone. You've observed that?
Yeah, yeah. So a lot of hazing can be racialized or be sexualized. Yes. Um, there's a lot of research by a researcher at Temple around sexualized forms of hazing, and there's some recent incidents which show like the racialization of hazing, particularly anti-Semitic forms of hazing, right? Um, and I can send you those links too if that's helpful later. Um, so hazing has some real dark, corners, right? Especially when it's specifically anonymous. You remove, so it's not just a filtered, like, doing the calisthenics in someone's basement and being thrown rotten foods is the old stereotype. But because you have you know, the blurred filter of being online where someone can't I identify you, that's where it gets extremely dark. Yes.
Yeah. And I think a lot of people when they think of hazing, it's very common to think of athletics. It's very common to think of fraternities and sororities. But, to what extent does it also pervade? You've brought up examples of some other groups, like, I don't know, I guess the more artsy or nerdy groups that you just don't stereotypically think of, like those choir or marching band or, I don't know, like dance groups and things like that.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. There's a lot of media headlines and cases of student conduct where there's hazing in marching bands, right? That student at Florida A&M, right? At FAMU, he died in the marching band. Marching bands have a lot of physical hazing, right? Not necessarily drinking, but a lot of physical hazing involving instruments or other things like that. You're outside in the heat a lot of servitude. Men's choir groups have a lot of drinking, and you wouldn't think that, right? And a lot of forced group bonding, and a lot of pranks and like scavenger hunts, a lot of servitude. The more, I guess, groups we think of like Pitch Perfect or something like that, right? Like maybe that's more timely reference, but like that tends to be more drinking, group drinking. Like they're not forcing just the new members to drink, but everyone has to drink. Um, and then it's mostly servitude, right? Because it matches like and orchestra first chair, second chair, and there's a rank order of who has power. So there's a lot of like individualized hazing. Oh, you have to clean my room and do my laundry. So a lot of like pranks and like I'm gonna throw stuff on your car and throw paint on you while you walk on campus. So the pranks and the scavenger hunts can get out of hand, but as can the servitude. So they tend to be those forms. And more than likely, it can go into the online space as well with with like forms of like verbal harassment or like online harassment.
Yeah. And I'm curious how that has or if it has changed the way that, I guess, like obviously it's changing the way hazing is experienced, but in terms of the psychological impact, when you're
Mm,
not only being hazed in person, but it follows you home. You know, you have to see that TikTok dance posted on the frats page, and it's on
yeah.
their fruit page and it got 1,000 views, you know, whatever, like that it follows you. How does that, I guess, impact people?
So, there's, you know, I think there's no research around this yet, right? We know from some of the emerging research that hazing has mental health implications, right? There's a level of trauma you carry with you around hazing. Um, but something that I'm curious about, there's no research around this. This is an observation from looking at like the media headlines and all the cases that we're seeing in hazing. There seems to be a social stigma with hazing, right? In that you're this victim of hazing and you're online and you're embarrassed in public, right? So there's a social stigma, and that has a social cost, right? Like you're perceived as like in like a negative social light, and and especially if you're an athlete or you're a student leader on like campus and everyone knows you, that gets extremely complex. So I think the social stigma piece and the way it sort of leaves us a scarlet letter or like a scarlet H in a sense on you. I think that that's something that has changed, right? Because everything is so much more visual with online now, right? Like I could be a victim of hazing and hide myself, but that's a lot harder now because things go viral, and that's the real thing that's changed is like the social media context, and people film hazing. Um, Most students film hazing now, and then when they actually get in trouble, there's video evidence or picture evidence, and you're able to track and specifically see who were the perpetuators of the hazing or were present while they were there. So it's just, that's kind of where that's the big change is there's more evidence to prove there was hazing, and it's more incriminating.
Yeah, that's something that I kind of had thought about earlier when we were talking about how so much hazing is filmed and it goes viral. It's like, well, the flip side of that is that, that is terrible for the victims, but now there's proof of it happening. So I don't know, maybe that's almost helpful. But I'm curious to, it does feel like over the years, and as someone who was just recently in college and was just recently in Greek life,
Yeah.
I do feel like there is a very strong emphasis from the organizational standpoint on preventing hazing. All the frats and sororities and the universities make you go through these trainings or workshops, and you talk about hazing and what does it look like and who do you report it to. And there's a federal law passed recently, so there's
Mhm.
been kind of a rise in anti-hazing efforts. So first, from your experience or from your observations, is that having a positive impact? And I guess just, yeah, along those lines, how effective are those actions in the long term?
Well, one of the unique differences between hazing with fraternities and sororities and the rest of campus is that students often don't die from hazing like they do with fraternities and sororities. And that's probably my biggest worry and my biggest critique, right? Is, the men's choir group is not going to kill someone, right? Um, is it embarrassing? Is it wrong? Is it illegal? Absolutely. Um, and so all hazing is wrong. All hazing should be stopped. My biggest worry is that hazing in fraternities and sororities involves alcohol, and that's how people die every time. If it's Timothy Piazza or Max Gruber or any of these students, um, the physicality of hazing and the forced alcohol use is what makes people die. Um, and so I think the efforts are then to save lives, right? Like that student at Mizzou is literally in a wheelchair because he was hazed. So, um, and he may never regain function, right? Like he used to. So I think these are all scary. So I think that's my biggest worry. And so the idea is to prevent hazing, to reduce the harm, right? I think there's a debate amongst administrators. Can we fully stop hazing? Right. or do we just focus on trying to reduce the harm? We know it's going to happen. We know, and we know that students are going to break these rules and laws. How do we teach them behaviors to intervene to reduce the harm or stop it while it's happening, right? So that sort of bystander intervention training has a lot of promise, right? To teach students to step up and speak out. So you see, campaigns like These Hands Don't Haze. You see students being taught how to be vocal and how to stop hazing within their chapters because we know it's going to happen. So those are the most promising ones to me, and just teaching students how to respond to hazing, to say no, right? It feels like 1990s, like, just say no could kind of a vibe, but at the same time, those are the most individual promising techniques. Um, things like stopping partying or unrecognizing or organizations don't work, right? Like telling students no just makes them want to do it more. What does work, and the other thing that works is not more punishment, but more supervision, right? What works is having chapter leaders living in the chapter house, having active alumni boards, right? Making sure that your chapter officers are trained. And so the moment that you step back supervision, hazing tends to increase, right? So supervision matters and like the individual trainings matter. Those are the two best things we know that work. As well as trying to promote alcohol safety, right? Those are the things we all know save lives. Is hazing going to probably happen? Unfortunately, I hope not. But maybe if it does, we have these tools, right, to be able to prevent and reduce the severity of it. So those are the things we know that work, and looking for all of the early warning signs, because hazing tends to snowball, right? It starts with something innocuous like a scavenger hunt, and then it turns into like having to go find 40 alcohol things from all these other houses or like students like apartments, and then you have to drink them. So that's where it gets kind of scary.
Right. What are some of the misconceptions that you feel like you hear a lot about hazing?
That not all hazing involves drinking, right? It can be little things like online harassment, having to clean people's rooms, right? Like having to clean, having to do all of their white laundry and, pour it in an oddly specific way, right? So it, or just even doing forced TikTok dances, right? Like maybe they're making the new members do the new cat's eye dance or something, right? Like those are the things that you're kind of seeing even now with hazing. Like, oh, you guys all have to learn learn like the Gap ad dance, right? Like that's literally what's happening now with hazing. So that's been the most recent thing I've seen. So hazing, and so you see these sorority women all like doing this dance, but you're like, these people don't look happy. There's something a little sketchy about this. So it's hazing can be like innocuous, right? And you don't know, but over time you're like, this doesn't seem right. This keeps happening. Like, why am I being forced to do this? And so hazing particularly has become more covert, right? It's not like the Animal House, like, I'm going to chug this alcohol down your throat. That's like very 1980s and 1990s, right? Students have gotten smarter and they have found ways to hide hazing. And that's what makes me nervous, is like the underground nature of hazing, because if it's been happening for a long time, it means it's really innocuous. And then it sort of primes you for that big last hazing event that tends to be extremely dangerous, like forced alcohol, right? And so there's a lot of this sort of grooming and priming going on to increase people's tolerance for hazing. It's become really sophisticated, and that's what's changed. And so fraternities or campus administrators don't pick up on this until someone's severely hurt, and then you always find out, oh, this has been happening for a really long time. This is not new. It's just they've been hiding it, and they've been trying to teach their members like how to tolerate hazing more, right? It's that socialization piece that I'm actually talking about. So that's what's changed. They get really, really good at it. However, sort of the blessing is social media because students are students and they're going to post the wrong thing. So
Yeah. I think we've gone through
I can
the
talk about a lot of
majority of my, I
it. Yeah,
know. Well, and there's so many things to talk about. I do, I have another story that I'm working on today, so I didn't want to
sure.
have this go on too long. And I do feel like we covered a lot of really what I'm talking about in this story. So I would just say if there's anything like really like that, in the back of your mind, it's gonna be like, oh, it's gonna bug you that you didn't talk about this, or, anything that you want to um, make sure we get to before we wrap things up, or just that you want people to know about hazing.
Um, I think that I think that hazing is not everywhere, right? It's not like you're gonna join a fraternity, sorority, or the choir group and have a sing off and get hazed, right? Like I don't think it's always like that. I think it tends to be like ingrained in certain organizations, and then the others just have these rites of passage that are probably still hazing, but and so it's a common thing, but I don't think it happens all of the time as frequently as we think it does, right? Um, it tends to be like a one-off thing or a one-off thing here, and so the odds of someone being hazed is high, but the odds of it being continuous is not as high, right? Less frequency, probably more volume is what I'm saying, right? So I think there's a misperception around that, right? Will you be hazed? More than likely. Will it be severe? Probably not, right? And so it's a matter of like how are you navigating these individual hazing scenarios, and how are you responding as a student and saying this is not okay? And then how is your chapter stepping in it and also saying, yo, this is like not okay, we should stop this. So I think those are the major things. Will it happen? Yes. Will it happen all the time? No.